Week 33, Overview, America under the Articles of Confederation. We cover 4 years this week, from the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783 to the reorganization of the nation under a new constitution in 1787. Rhetoric students get to compare the Roman general and hero Cincinnatus with George Washington, who resigned his commission at the end of the war and refused to be made king. Washington's submission to the rules of the new government sent a loud message to American and European leaders alike. During this period, the law in the land in America was embodied in the Articles of Confederation, which formed a loose confederation of the 13 sovereign states. The Confederation was authorized to declare war, negotiate diplomatic agreements, and resolve issues regarding the Western territories. It could print money and borrow inside and outside the U.S., but it had no power to enforce any of its decisions. In just a few years, states were bickering among themselves, coining money, refusing to pay taxes, and arguing about expansion. In several states, desperate citizens who were fed up with their inadequate government rose in armed rebellion. The last of these, called Shays' Rebellion, gave sober-minded leaders the support they needed to call a constitutional convention for the purpose of radical change in the structure of the central government. As we'll study next week, the Articles were replaced by the United States Constitution on June 21, 1788. There's more to the world than just America, though. Even as the infant nation was struggling to find her feet, the old order in Europe was tottering. Rhetoric students will see how popular unrest led to uprisings and demands for change that parallel events in America. These happened in Netherlands, Poland, and France. Those uprisings were crushed in the Netherlands and Poland, but the stage was being set in France for a mighty upheaval, the French Revolution. We'll end this year studying the terror that descended on France, and we'll start next year with Napoleon, who seized power and led France into wars that engulfed all Europe for a generation. Napoleon's rise to power is impressive but not surprising. What's unusual in the history of the world is a man who has power and gives it up. In that respect, one of history's biggest surprises was when General George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army after he won the Revolutionary War. It was the last thing most people expected. The infant United States of America was governed by the Articles of Confederation, which provided for no executive leader, such as a president. Washington was universally respected, admired, and loved by his fighting men, other leaders, and leaders abroad. Many soldiers wanted to make him king of the new American nation. Many European leaders expected him to seize power as the war ended. They were astonished when he did not, and wondered aloud what kind of man Washington must be and what ideals this American people must have to bring about such an event. The Treaty of Paris, which was signed in September, recognized the independence of the United States. Washington disbanded his army, and on November 2nd gave an eloquent farewell address to his soldiers. On November 25th, the British evacuated New York City, and Washington and the governor took possession. At Fraunce's Tavern on December 4th, Washington formally bade his officers farewell, and on December 23, 1783, he resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief, emulating the Roman general Cincinnatus. Students who used tapestry in Year 1 may remember that Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus was a Roman farmer 5 centuries before Christ. Hostile tribes were attacking Rome, and the Senate begged Cincinnatus to lead their armies. They offered him the post of dictator, which back then meant that he was absolute ruler for a limited time. Cincinnatus left his plow to take up arms, and 16 days later had led the Romans to victory. That's not what he's mostly remembered for, though. There have been plenty of military victories in human history. Cincinnatus is remembered to this day for handing power back to the Roman Senate as soon as the crisis was over. He returned to the plow he had left behind. George Washington showed the world that the American Republic had the same potential for greatness as the Roman Republic did, for it had the same kind of humble heroes. But the American Republic had troubles ahead of it. Washington knew its weaknesses as well as anyone. His men had suffered the most from the weaknesses of the new government, and he solemnly warned other leaders that he had grave doubts about the stability and longevity of America under the Articles of Confederation. Overall, the Articles of Confederation formed a federal government that proved insufficient for the task of unifying the states into one nation. Although it served a crucial role in the attainment of nationhood for the 13 states, the Articles did not provide an effective central government and did not maintain a good balance between large and small states in the legislative process. Congress lacked taxing authority. It could determine expenses, as with the war effort, and then pay them from a common treasury, but this fund had to be built with money requested from states in proportion to their land size and development. Congress had no direct power to tax or to draft soldiers. Since all states had one vote on all questions, many citizens of the larger states felt they were expected to contribute more but had the same amount of influence as the smaller states. But nobody could change the Articles of Confederation because any amendment had to be unanimous, and for any given problem there seemed to always be some state that liked things just the way they were. There were problems with the Articles of Confederation from the very beginning. They were drafted after the Declaration of Independence, while all the colonies were directly threatened by the military power of Britain, yet some of the states still refused to sign the Articles until they got their way. Maryland was the last to sign. They held out until 1781. They insisted that all the other states must give up their claims to the lands north and west of the Ohio River before they would sign on. Dealing with this western land turned out to be one of the few things the Articles of Confederation were good for. The new nation had lots of land, valuable land which could be used to pay off war debts. In 1785, Congress ordered the land north and west of the Ohio River to be surveyed into 1 square mile plots, to be sold for no less than $1 per acre. In 1763, King George had banned any settlement in these western lands. The United States acquired that territory by winning the Revolutionary War. Now they could open it up for settlement. In 1787, Congress enacted the Northwest Ordinance, which provided for this land to be divided. The ordinance set up a territorial government and established a path for new states to join the Union. Growth was slow at first because of Indian attacks, but Ohio became a state in 1803, Indiana in 1816, Illinois in 1818, Michigan in 1837, and Wisconsin in 1848. The ordinance prohibited slavery in the new territory, so the Ohio River became a boundary line between slave states and free states. The ordinance laid the foundation for a system of free public schools in the new territory, saying, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged." Congress used land sales to pay off some debts. Land speculators raised millions of dollars to buy millions of acres. Some of the soldiers who never got paid for their service during the war accepted warrants for land in lieu of back pay. But that didn't help many other veterans who had served the new country. Daniel Shays was one such soldier. He had served in the war and then returned to his home in western Massachusetts. The farmers in that part of the state were being crushed by taxes Massachusetts had levied to try to pay its debts, and Shays became their leader and champion. Protests turned to riots and then revolt. In August 1786, the farmers took up arms. Before the year was out, armed groups attacked the courthouses in Concord, Springfield, Worcester, and other towns. In January, Shays led a small army to the Federal arsenal at Springfield, but he wasn't able to capture that stockpile of weapons. Massachusetts troops counterattacked in February, but sporadic fighting continued until June. Shays' rebellion helped prod George Washington out of retirement and back into the risky business of leadership. He wrote, "I am mortified beyond expression when I view the clouds that have spread over the brightest morn that ever dawned in any country. What a triumph for the advocates of despotism to find that we are incapable of governing ourselves, and that systems founded on the basis of equal liberty are merely ideal and fallacious." Massachusetts was able to put down Shays' rebellion, but what about the next? There was no provision in the Articles of Confederation for this kind of trouble. Pennsylvania, Maryland, and South Carolina had already had similar outbreaks of violence, and all the states were in precarious positions financially. The rebellion was a catalyst for change. Something had to be done to strengthen the central government. There were problems aplenty in the new United States, but there were opportunities too, especially out on the frontier. While Congress was ordering surveyors to measure out the lands north of the Ohio River, Daniel Boone and other pioneers set out for the land of the South, Kentucky. Boone was born in 1734 to Quaker parents in a log cabin near what is now Reading, Pennsylvania. He was one of 11 children. At the age of 16, his family moved to the wilds of North Carolina, where he became a skillful hunter. He was 22 when he married 17-year-old Rebecca, a true pioneer woman who followed him across the wilds of Kentucky, raising 10 children on the way. The settlers had heard stories about the land across the Appalachians. They sounded like paradise to Boone. There were supposed to be deer, elk, wild turkey, buffalo, everything a hunter could hope for. Daniel tried to find a way west over the mountains late in 1767, but bad weather kept him from finding a way through the mountains. In 1769, Boone found the Warrior's Path, a narrow but well-defined trail that Indians had used for centuries. Boone and a companion crossed the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky, and it was everything Boone had hoped for. There were herds of buffalo. The woods were full of game, and the land was perfect for farming. He spent 2 years in Kentucky on that trip. He was captured by Indians once, but was released. Boone came back to North Carolina and teamed up with a judge to buy land from the Cherokee Indians. Then he set out with 30 men to build a road across the mountains. He built a fort at a site he called Boonesboro and brought his wife and family with him. Rebecca Boone was the first white woman to see the Kentucky side of the Appalachian Mountains. Daniel Boone wasn't done exploring, though. In 1799 he went west again, across the Mississippi River into Spanish territory. He said Kentucky had gotten too crowded. He wanted elbow room. Throughout his long life, Boone kept hunting. He switched to trapping when his eyes went bad. He died in 1820, at the age of 85. Let's leave Daniel Boone heading west and turn our eyes east for a moment, to the other side of the Atlantic. The American Revolution stirred the hearts and minds of millions. Europe was full of people, peasants and philosophers alike, who groaned under an ancient regime of aristocratic power and privilege. America's new republic proved that change was possible. Poland responded eagerly to the American experiment. Holland was another country where America's revolution struck a chord. Although it was technically a republic, the House of Orange had ruled the Netherlands more and more like a monarchy. The current rulers wanted to increase their power. Dutch patriots, the artisans and merchants of the middle class, began to oppose such rule. The situation came to armed rebellion. In the end, both sides lost, the rulers and the patriots alike. The uprising was put down by government forces and Prussian mercenaries. Most of the patriots fled the country. In France, the American example had more lasting effects. Frenchmen had grown tired of absolute monarchy. France was in a terrible financial state after the war. Commoners were overtaxed, but when they complained, King Louis XVI taxed them even more. His queen, Marie Antoinette, spent a fortune on fashions while the peasants starved. The French philosophes were spreading new ideas of liberty and equality. These Enlightenment thinkers questioned traditional French society, including the Roman Catholic Church, and the people were listening. The government tried to stifle it by banning a popular opera, The Marriage of Figaro, but new ideas were in the air, in the songs, in the plays, at the cafes. It was a time of great challenge in Europe and America. Many in Europe were inspired by America's experiment with Republican self-government, but the experiment could hardly be pronounced a success yet. The 13 colonies had named themselves the United States, but the Articles of Confederation was hardly up to the task of uniting 13 very divided states. We'll see how Americans solve that problem next week.